Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. The GPS in my Moonlight cab doesn't show street names. It shows the names of the dead. Turn left at Bobby Henderson, who died in a car wreck in 1987. Head straight past Sarah Mills, murdered by her husband in their kitchen in 1993. Make a right at the intersection of Tommy Park and Lisa Chen, two teenagers who overdosed behind the Walmart in 2001. At first, I thought it was some kind of sick joke, a prank played on the new driver by coworkers with too much time and too little conscience. Then I started noticing the graves. Every turn the GPS calls out, every name that speaks in that mechanical voice, corresponds to a headstone, a memorial, a roadside cross marking where somebody's life ended too soon. The roads of Arkansas are built on bones, and my taxi follows them like a hearse, making eternal rounds. And sometimes, late at night, when the fog rolls in thick from the river, I catch glimpses of them in my headlights, the people whose names guide my way, standing at their intersections, watching me pass with eyes like broken headlights. My name's Waylon Briggs, and I never planned on staying in Pine Bluff. Hell, I never planned on coming here at all. 3 months ago, I was living in Memphis, working construction, until my back gave out hauling rebar on a high-rise project. The settlement money barely covered my medical bills, and my wife Donna took what was left when she filed for divorce. Said she couldn't handle being married to a man who spent more time on pain pills than talking to her. She wasn't wrong. The Greyhound ticket to Pine Bluff cost $43, all I had left after buying a week's worth of gas station sandwiches. I picked Arkansas because my cousin Earl mentioned work opportunities down here, though he conveniently forgot to mention he'd moved to Oklahoma 2 years prior. By the time I figured that out, I was already sleeping in the bus station, counting quarters for vending machine coffee. That's when I saw the help wanted sign taped to the window of Moonlight Cab Company on Main Street. The building looked like it hadn't been painted since the Clinton administration, its yellow brick facade streaked with rust stains from decades of Arkansas rain. The parking lot was mostly gravel and weeds, with 4 beat-up Crown Victorias that had seen better decades. The owner, Lester Crowley, hired me on the spot. Didn't ask for references, didn't run a background check, just handed me keys to car number 3 and a laminated sheet of company protocols. "Read these tonight," he said, his Arkansas drawl thick as molasses. "Start tomorrow at sunset. Night shift pays better, and the roads are different after dark." I should have asked what he meant by different. Should have wondered why a small-town cab company needed drivers specifically for night shifts. Should have questioned why every other employee looked like they'd seen things that aged them beyond their years. Instead, I took the job. I needed the money, and Pine Bluff seemed quiet enough. How much trouble could a taxi driver get into in a town of 40,000 people? I was about to find out. I spent my first day in Pine Bluff, walking around downtown, trying to get a feel for the place. The Arkansas River meandered past the city like a brown ribbon, and the smell of catfish restaurants mixed with diesel fumes from the Union Pacific trains that rumbled through twice daily. By 5:30, I was parked outside Moonlight Cab Company, reading through the laminated protocols Lester had given me. Moonlight Cab Company, driver protocols, night shift operations, Protocol 1. Always trust the GPS directions, even when they seem wrong. The system knows roads that don't appear on regular maps. Protocol 2. If a passenger requests to go to Oakwood Cemetery after midnight, inform them the fare is triple rate. If they agree, drive them to the main gate only. Do not enter the cemetery grounds. Protocol 3. When driving past the old Simmons Bank building on Main Street, keep your windows up and radio off. Count the floors as you pass. If you count more than 3 floors, circle the block until you count 3 again. Protocol 4. Never pick up passengers at the corner of 6th and Ohio between 2:17 a.m. and 2:23 a.m. If someone waves you down during this time, pretend you don't see them and keep driving. Protocol 5. If your radio starts playing gospel music that you didn't tune in, let it play until the song finishes. Do not change the station or turn the volume down. Protocol 6. Should you see a woman in a yellow dress standing by the road with her thumb out, do not stop. She's been trying to get home since 1974. Protocol 7. If a passenger gives you an address that your GPS can't locate, ask them to spell the street name. If they spell it backwards, end your shift immediately and return to the depot. The rules felt like someone's idea of a practical joke, but I folded the paper and stuck it in my visor anyway. Lester emerged from the office at exactly 6 p.m., his gray hair combed over a scalp that showed through like pink road map. He wore the same oil-stained work shirt he'd had on during my interview. "Waylon, meet Jackson Reeves. He's been driving nights for about 8 months now." Lester gestured to a black man in his 40s, leaning against car number 2. Jackson had the lean build of someone who'd done physical labor most of his life, and his handshake was firm but brief. "You read the protocols?" Jackson asked, lighting a Marlboro Red. "Yeah, but they seem a little strange." Jackson took a long drag. "That's what I thought too, until my 3rd week when I picked up a fare at 2:19 a.m. on Ohio Street. Guy got in, told me to drive to the river. Soon as we started moving, he began talking about his daughter's funeral, how he'd missed it because he was working late at the cotton mill." Jackson flicked ash onto the gravel. "Problem was, the cotton mill closed in 1963. And the guy sitting in my back seat, he was wearing clothes that looked like they came from a museum." "What happened?" I pulled over, turned around to tell him we were here, and the back seat was empty. Door never opened. Windows never rolled down. But there was a $20 bill on the seat with a date from 1962. Lester handed me the keys to car number 3, a 2008 Crown Victoria with 280,000 miles on the odometer. The interior smelled like stale cigarettes and pine air freshener that had given up trying years ago. "GPS is already programmed," Lester said. "Just follow the route it gives you. Radio's on channel 4. Jackson and the other drivers will be on there if you need backup." I started the engine, and the GPS screen flickered to life. Instead of showing Pine Bluff, AR, like a normal system, the display read, "Welcome to the night roads. Current location, depot. Awaiting passenger request." The radio crackled. "Car number 3, you've got a pickup at the Waffle House on Camden Road. Passenger name is Betty Hawkins." I knew the Waffle House. Had walked past it earlier that day. It was a 15-minute drive through the residential section, where modest ranch houses sat behind chain-link fences and carports. But as I pulled out of the depot, the GPS directed me down Oak Street, past the courthouse where a Confederate monument stood surrounded by dying azaleas. "Turn right at Margaret Willis," the GPS announced in its flat electronic tone. I looked around for a street sign. Instead, I saw a small white cross planted in the grass near the intersection, with Margaret Willis 1954 to 1978 painted in black letters. My stomach twisted like a wet dish rag, but I made the turn. The street actually existed, Maple Avenue according to the faded sign, but the GPS kept calling it Margaret Willis. As I drove, I noticed more crosses, more small memorials tucked between mailboxes and flower beds. Every direction the GPS called out corresponded to someone's final resting place, someone's last moment marked by family members who refused to let them be forgotten. The Waffle House appeared ahead, its yellow sign glowing against the darkening Arkansas sky. I pulled into the parking lot and waited, watching the front door for Betty Hawkins, while my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. A woman in her 60s emerged, carrying a purse and walking with a slight limp. She approached the car and knocked on the passenger window. "You the cab?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Betty Hawkins." "That's me, honey. Need to get home to Redfield." Redfield was 30 minutes south, a farming community I'd never heard of until now. As Betty settled into the back seat, I noticed she smelled like lavender soap and something else. Something sweet and cloying that reminded me of funeral flowers. "Just follow the GPS, dear," she said softly. "It knows the way. Turn left at Timothy Marsh," the GPS instructed as we left Pine Bluff city limits. I squinted at the darkening road ahead. "Ma'am, I don't see a street sign for Timothy Marsh." Betty's reflection smiled in the rearview mirror. "Oh, honey, Timothy's been gone since the flood of '82, but he's still there, marking the way for folks like us." The headlights swept across a small wooden cross planted beside a drainage ditch. Timothy Marsh, 1954 to 1982, was carved into the weathered wood. I made the left turn onto what looked like a county road, gravel crunching under the tires. "You're new to Moonlight, aren't you?" Betty asked, her voice carrying the gentle authority of a retired schoolteacher. "Started tonight. How'd you know?" "The way you're gripping that steering wheel like it might run away from you. Most folks take a few weeks to get comfortable with the night routes." She shifted in the back seat, her purse rustling. "Where you from originally?" "Memphis. Lost my construction job after a back injury." The words came easier than expected. Something about Betty made conversation feel natural, like talking to a favorite aunt. "Memphis is a hard city. All that noise and rushing around. Pine Bluff's different, slower, but that don't mean it's simpler." She paused. "You got family back there?" "Ex-wife. She kept the house and most everything else." I caught myself oversharing and focused on the road. The GPS was guiding us down increasingly rural routes, past farmhouses with porch lights glowing like earthbound stars. Divorce is rough, especially when it comes on top of other troubles. But sometimes life pushes us where we need to be, even when we can't see the reason yet. We passed a weathered billboard advertising a long-closed restaurant. Ruby's Catfish Palace, Exit 7. Spanish moss hung from oak trees like tattered curtains, and fireflies blinked in the roadside grass like tiny emergency flares. "Continue straight past Jennifer Woolfolk," the GPS announced. This time I spotted the memorial immediately, a cluster of silk flowers tied to a fence post, with a laminated photograph of a young woman in a graduation cap. The date read 1989 to 2007. "Drunk driver got her coming home from work," Betty said quietly. "Third shift at the chicken plant. Left behind 2 little boys." "You know all these people?" "When you've lived in Arkansas long enough, you know everybody's story. The dead don't leave. They just change neighborhoods." A few miles later, my radio began crackling with static. Through the interference, I caught fragments of what sounded like a gospel song. "Shall gather at the river, the beautiful river." Betty hummed along softly. "That's Protocol 5, isn't it?" "Let it finish." "You know about the protocols?" "Honey, I helped write them." The song continued for another minute before fading back to static. I reached for the radio dial, then remembered the rules. and left it alone. "Turn right at David Carpenter," the GPS directed. We entered what looked like an older section of farmland, where barbed wire fences marked property lines and cattle bunched together under scattered trees. The cross for David Carpenter was made of rusted metal, nearly hidden by tall grass. "Farming accident," Betty explained, without being asked. "Tractor rolled over on him in '91. His wife sold the land and moved to Little Rock with their daughter." "How do you know all this?" "I was the county clerk for 37 years, recorded every birth certificate, every death certificate, every deed transfer in Jefferson County. After you filed enough paperwork, you start to see the patterns." We'd been driving for 20 minutes when the GPS announced, "Approaching Oakwood Cemetery, passenger destination ahead." I nearly swerved into the ditch. "Ma'am, you said you were going to Redfield." "I am going home, honey. Redfield's where I lived. Oakwood's where I belong." The cemetery gates appeared in my headlights, black iron bars with Oakwood Cemetery established. 1887 spelled out in Gothic letters. According to Protocol 2, I was supposed to stop at the main gate after midnight for triple fare. But it was only 8:30, and Betty seemed perfectly alive. "This will be fine right here," Betty said as I pulled up to the entrance. I turned around to face her, and my throat constricted like someone had tied a knot in it. Betty's floral dress was faded and torn, as if she'd been wearing it for decades. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and her eyes reflected light like a cat's. "That'll be $12, dear," she said, counting out bills from a purse that looked like it had been buried and dug up. The money felt cold and slightly damp. As I counted it, Betty stepped out of the car and walked toward the cemetery gates. She didn't open them, just passed through the iron bars like they were made of mist. I sat there for several minutes, engine idling, staring at the empty gate. The bills in my hand were real enough, though they felt wrong somehow. I held one up to the dome light and saw it was a $10 bill from 1963. My radio crackled. "Car number 3, you've got another pickup. Wesley's 24-hour diner on Highway 65. Passenger name is Earl Hutchins." Jackson's voice came through clearly. "How'd the first run go, Waylon?" I keyed the mic, picked up a woman who walked through solid iron bars. "Yeah, that's Betty. She makes that trip every Tuesday. Been doing it since she passed in '98. Sweet lady. Always tips well. The money she gave me is from 1963. Check your wallet tomorrow morning. It'll be regular bills by then. The night roads have their own currency, but it converts by daylight." I pulled away from the cemetery, hands shaking slightly, as I programmed the GPS for Wesley's diner. The screen flickered and displayed. Route calculated. Estimated arrival, 11 minutes. Warning, road construction ahead. But there was no road construction on Highway 65. I'd driven it that afternoon, and everything was clear. As I headed back toward civilization, the GPS guided me through a series of back roads I hadn't seen on any map. We passed through a section where the asphalt looked freshly poured, still dark and smooth. A sign read, "Memorial Highway, dedicated to the victims of the 1999 tornado." Then I realized what the GPS meant by road construction. This wasn't a detour around physical construction. It was a route through roads that had been built to remember the dead, asphalt laid over ground where people had died, connecting memorial to memorial like a vast, sprawling grave marker. The dead weren't just guiding my route. They were the route. Wesley's Diner sat at the intersection of Highway 65 and County Road 42, its neon sign flickering between "Open 24 hours" and "Op-N 24 Ho RS." I pulled into the gravel parking lot and waited, watching the front door while trying to process what had just happened. A man in his 70s emerged, wearing overalls and a John Deere cap. He approached the car with the careful gait of someone whose knees had seen too many Arkansas winters. "You the cab?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Earl Hutchins." "That's right. Need to get to the old Miller place out on Redfield Road." He climbed into the back seat, bringing the smell of motor oil and chewing tobacco. As we pulled back onto Highway 65, I couldn't shake the feeling that Earl was studying me in the rearview mirror. "First night?" he asked. "That obvious?" "You'll get used to it. The night roads take some adjusting, but they're fair. Follow the rules, treat the passengers with respect, and you'll do fine." The GPS directed us past several more memorials, each one marking another tragedy, another life cut short. Earl seemed to know them all, offering quiet commentary about car wrecks and heart attacks and accidents that had shaped the landscape of Jefferson County. "Turn left at Amanda Foster," the GPS announced. "Little girl," Earl said sadly. "Leukemia took her when she was 7. That was back in 75. I made the turn, noticing how the trees seemed to lean in closer here, forming a tunnel of branches over the narrow road. The trees formed a canopy so thick that my headlights barely penetrated 20 feet ahead. Earl sat quietly in the back seat, occasionally directing me to keep straight or "that's the right way," when the GPS seemed to be guiding us through what looked like farmers' fields rather than actual roads. "How long have you been taking cabs out here?" I asked, trying to make conversation and calm my nerves. "Oh, I don't usually need rides. Got my own truck." Earl shifted in the seat. "But tonight's special. Tonight I'm saying goodbye. Going somewhere." "You could say that." His reflection caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Tell me something, son. You believe in second chances." "Depends on what kind of second chance we're talking about." Earl chuckled, a dry sound like leaves scraping pavement. "The kind where you get to fix the worst mistake you ever made. Where you get to save someone you let down when it mattered most." We passed a rusted mailbox leaning at a 45-degree angle. The name Miller was barely visible through decades of weather damage. The GPS announced, "Destination ahead. Turn right at Robert Miller." But there was no cross, no memorial marker, just an overgrown driveway disappearing into a wall of kudzu and volunteer trees. "This is it," Earl said, "the old Miller place." I turned into the driveway, branches scraping against the Crown Victoria's roof like fingernails on a chalkboard. After about 50 yards, we emerged into a clearing where the foundation of a house sat like a concrete scar on the earth. Charred timber beams jutted up from the ruins, and a brick chimney stood alone against the Arkansas sky. "House burned down in 1987, Earl said, opening the car door. "Family inside didn't make it out." "I'm sorry to hear that." Earl paused with one foot on the gravel. "They didn't make it out because I was too drunk to drive the fire truck properly. I was volunteer fire chief back then, and when the call came in, I'd been celebrating my birthday at Murphy's Bar. Took me 20 minutes to get the truck started, another 15 to find this place in the dark." The weight of his confession settled between us like a third passenger. By the time we got here, the whole house was gone. Robert Miller, his wife Janet, their 2 kids. Tommy was 8, Lisa was 6, all because I chose whiskey over responsibility. Earl stepped completely out of the car. That was 37 years ago. I've been carrying that guilt ever since. And tonight, I finally get to make it right. "How do you mean?" But Earl was already walking toward the ruins, moving with purpose despite his age. I watched him disappear into the darkness beyond my headlights, then checked my watch. 9:47 p.m. My radio crackled. "Car number 3, what's your status?" I keyed the mic. "Just dropped off a passenger at the old Miller place. Burned down house off County Road 42. Jackson's voice came back immediately. "Waylon, you need to get out of there. Right now." "Why? What's wrong?" "The Miller place isn't on any of our approved routes. Check your GPS." I looked at the screen. Instead of showing our location, it displayed an error message. "Location not found. Please return to authorized roadway immediately." "Jackson, my passenger." "What passenger?" "Your last pickup was Betty at Oakwood Cemetery. You've been driving empty for the past hour." My stomach dropped like a stone down a well. I grabbed the laminated protocols from my visor and ran my finger down the list, looking for anything about unauthorized destinations or phantom passengers. "Jackson, Earl Hutchins was definitely in my car. Older guy, overalls, John Deere cap. Said he needed to get to the Miller place." "Waylon, Earl Hutchins died 3 months ago. Heart attack while working on his truck. I drove him to his doctor's appointments for 2 years before that." The radio went quiet except for static. I stared at the empty back seat, then at the ruins where Earl had vanished. The smell of motor oil and chewing tobacco still lingered in the car. "Continue straight past Robert Miller," the GPS suddenly announced, even though I was parked. I looked through the windshield and saw 4 figures standing among the burned timbers: a man, a woman, and 2 small children. They were translucent, like heat mirages, but clearly visible in my headlights. The man raised his hand in what might have been a wave or a warning. Then Earl appeared beside them, no longer bent with age but standing straight and tall. He walked toward my car with steady steps, and as he got closer, I could see that his overalls were no longer faded denim, but the crisp navy blue of a fire department uniform. He approached the driver's side window and tapped gently. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I rolled it down. "Thank you for the ride, son," Earl said. His voice sounded younger, clearer. I needed to apologize to them face to face. Been trying to get here for 3 months, but the living can't always find their way to places like this. "Are you dead?" "Yeah, I am. Happened right after my last ride with Moonlight. Jackson drove me to Dr. Patterson's office for what turned out to be my final checkup." Earl smiled, and for the first time since I'd picked him up, he looked peaceful. "The night roads don't just carry the living, Waylon. Sometimes they carry the dead who have unfinished business." Behind him, the Miller family began to fade like morning mist, but not before the man, Robert Miller, nodded once in Earl's direction. "They forgive you?" I asked. "They understood. That's sometimes better than forgiveness." Earl stepped back from the car. "You should head back to town now. It's getting late, and there are other passengers who need rides." "Will I see you again?" "Not me. I'm moving on to wherever folks like me go when the guilt finally lifts." Earl touched the brim of his cap. "But you'll see others. The night roads are full of people trying to get somewhere they never could reach in life." I put the car in reverse and slowly backed out of the clearing. When I reached the main road and looked back, the Miller place was dark again, as if nothing had happened. But the passenger seat was no longer empty. A $20 bill sat there, this one crisp and new, with a current date. My radio crackled. "Car number 3, you've got a pickup at the Walmart parking lot on University Avenue. Passenger says her name is Michelle Torres." I recognized the location. The same Walmart where Tommy Park and Lisa Chen had overdosed behind the building in 2001, according to my GPS's inaugural announcement. As I drove back toward Pine Bluff, the GPS guided me past their memorial. 2 wooden crosses planted in the tall grass behind the store's loading dock. Turn right at Tommy Park. Continue straight past Lisa Chen, the GPS instructed. But this time, something was different. As I passed the crosses, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl, stood near the memorial. They were solid, not translucent like the Miller family had been. The girl waved at my taxi, and for a moment I thought about stopping. Then I remembered Protocol 4. Never pick up passengers at certain locations during specific times. I checked my watch, 10:23 p.m. Not the prohibited time frame, but something about the teenagers made me uneasy. They looked too clean, too healthy for people who'd supposedly died from drug overdoses. I kept driving. The Walmart parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few cars belonging to overnight employees. A woman in her 30s stood near the entrance, wearing scrubs that marked her as hospital staff. She had the tired expression of someone finishing a long shift. "Michelle Torres?" I asked as she approached the car. "That's me. Need to get home to North Little Rock. My car wouldn't start after my shift at Jefferson Regional." She climbed into the back seat, bringing the antiseptic smell of hospital disinfectant. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed she kept glancing back toward the Walmart, as if she was worried about something. "Long shift?" I asked. 12 hours in the ICU. We lost 3 patients tonight." She rubbed her eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if this job is worth it. All that suffering, all those families getting the worst news of their lives. Must be hard. It is. But every now and then you save someone. Make a difference." She leaned back in the seat. "That's what keeps me going." The GPS guided us onto Highway 165 North, past sleeping farmhouses and 24-hour gas stations that glowed like beacons in the Arkansas darkness. Michelle fell quiet, probably decompressing from her shift. We'd been driving for about 15 minutes when she spoke again. "Driver, I need to ask you something. Have you ever seen people who shouldn't be there?" "What do you mean?" "Tonight at the hospital, I could have sworn I saw my grandmother in the hallway outside the ICU. She died 2 years ago, but there she was, clear as day, standing by the elevators." I glanced in the rearview mirror. Michelle's reflection looked solid enough, but after my experience with Earl, I wasn't taking anything for granted. "Did she say anything?" She smiled and pointed toward room 314. "That's where Mr. Garrett was, the patient we managed to pull through after his heart attack. Like she was telling me he was going to be okay." We passed a sign reading North Little Rock, 15 miles. The GPS showed our route clearly. No mysterious detours through memorial highways this time. "Do you believe in that kind of thing?" Michelle asked. "Spirits, ghosts, whatever you want to call them?" 3 hours ago, I would have said no. Tonight, I'm keeping an open mind. Good policy. Working nights, you see things that don't fit into the daylight world. The drive to North Little Rock should have been straightforward, straight up Highway 165 for about 30 miles. But as we approached the outskirts of Pine Bluff, the GPS directed me to take an exit I didn't remember seeing on my afternoon reconnaissance. "Turn right at Clarence Webb," the GPS announced. Another memorial cross appeared in my headlights, this one decorated with plastic flowers that had faded to pale ghosts of their original colors. I made the turn, following a route that seemed to curve through residential neighborhoods I hadn't seen before. "This doesn't look like the way to North Little Rock," Michelle observed from the back seat. "The GPS knows alternate routes," I said, repeating Lester's words from earlier. "Sometimes the main roads aren't the best option." But privately, I was starting to understand that the night roads operated by different rules than daytime travel. The GPS wasn't just avoiding traffic or construction. It was following pathways that connected the living world to something else entirely. We passed through a section of older homes where front porches sagged under the weight of decades, and chain-link fences marked small yards filled with garden gnomes and ceramic deer. Street lamps flickered sporadically, creating pools of yellow light separated by stretches of darkness. "I grew up in a neighborhood like this," Michelle said, "over in Jacksonville. My grandmother had a house with a screened porch where we'd sit during summer storms, watching the lightning and counting the thunder. Sounds peaceful." It was. Grandma always said storms brought messages from people who'd passed on. She'd point at the lightning and tell me that was Uncle Roy saying hello, or Cousin Marie checking on the family. Michelle's reflection smiled in the rearview mirror. I thought it was just old-fashioned superstition until I started working at the hospital. "When did you change your mind?" 3 years ago, during the tornado warning. We were moving patients to the basement when the power went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, but it was still pretty dark. I was helping an elderly man with his oxygen tank when I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway. The GPS guided us past another memorial, this one a large wooden cross with Harris family, 1995, carved into the crossbeam. I wondered what tragedy had claimed an entire family, but didn't ask. Some stories were too heavy for casual conversation. "It was my grandmother," Michelle continued. "She was wearing her favorite blue dress, the one we buried her in. She pointed toward the stairwell, and I realized we'd missed a patient in room 312. Went back and found Mrs. Patterson, 93 years old, lying in bed completely forgotten during the evacuation." "Did anyone else see your grandmother?" "No, just me. But Mrs. Patterson lived through the tornado because of what I saw. That's when I started believing that death isn't always the end of caring for people." We were approaching downtown Pine Bluff now, and I could see the Arkansas River Bridge ahead. But instead of directing me toward the bridge, the GPS instructed me to turn left on Main Street. "Continue straight past the Simmons Bank building," the GPS announced. I felt my mouth go dry. Protocol 3. Keep windows up, radio off, count the floors. If I counted more than 3, circle the block until I counted 3 again. I reached over and turned off the radio, then rolled up my window despite the warm September night. Michelle noticed the sudden change. "Everything okay?" "Just following company protocols," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The old Simmons Bank building appeared on our right, a brick structure from the 1920s that had been converted into apartments sometime in the 1980s. As we passed, I counted the floors carefully. Ground floor, check cashing business, and a closed restaurant. Second floor, apartments with lit windows and visible curtains. Third floor, more apartments, most windows dark. Fourth floor, windows that shouldn't exist, glowing with a pale blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. 4 floors. The building only had 3 floors. I'd seen it that afternoon, counted them myself. But now there was definitely a 4th floor, complete with windows that looked down at the street, with what felt like malevolent attention. "Driver, why are we slowing down?" Michelle asked. I realized I'd unconsciously reduced speed while staring at the building. "Just being careful. This is a tricky section of downtown." Following Protocol 3, I continued to the next intersection and turned right, then right again, circling the block. As we approached the Simmons Bank building from the other direction, I counted again. Ground floor, second floor, third floor. And that was it. 3 floors, exactly as it should be. The 4th floor had vanished, as if it had never existed. I turned the radio back on and rolled down my window, releasing a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "You seem tense," Michelle observed. "First night jitters?" "Something like that." We continued through downtown Pine Bluff, past the courthouse and the Confederate monument, heading toward the river. The GPS was finally directing us toward Highway 165 North, the straightforward route I'd expected from the beginning. "You know what the strangest part of my job is?" Michelle said as we crossed the Arkansas River Bridge. "It's not the death. You get used to that, unfortunately. It's the moments right before someone passes when they start talking to people who aren't there." "Family members?" "Usually. They'll be looking at the ceiling or the corner of the room, having conversations with their mother or their spouse or their child who died years earlier. The doctors call it terminal lucidity, say it's just the brain misfiring. But I've seen too many cases where the patient knew things they shouldn't have known." The bridge stretched ahead of us, its lights reflecting off the dark water below. Barges moved slowly upriver, their running lights like floating stars. "Like what?" "Last month, Mr. Rodriguez was dying of cancer, hadn't spoken coherently in 3 days. Then suddenly he sits up and starts talking to his brother Miguel, telling him he's sorry for the fight they had before Miguel died in Vietnam. Thing is, Mr. Rodriguez never told anyone he had a brother. We called his daughter, and she confirmed it. Miguel Rodriguez, killed in auction in 1968. And the two brothers had argued right before Miguel shipped out. We reached the north side of the river and merged onto Highway 165. The night landscape opened up before us. Farmland and scattered houses, billboards advertising everything from personal injury lawyers to Jesus. Michelle continued, "The daughter said her father carried that guilt for 50 years. Never talked about Miguel, never visited the Vietnam Memorial, nothing. But somehow, right before he died, he got the chance to apologize. Did it help?" He passed peacefully about an hour later. The daughter said it was the first time she'd seen him truly calm in years. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, passing through small communities marked only by gas stations and church signs. The GPS showed we were making good time toward North Little Rock, following the main highway without any mysterious detours. About halfway to our destination, Michelle spoke again. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. What brought you to Pine Bluff? Most people our age are trying to leave small Arkansas towns, not move to them." I found myself telling her about Memphis, about the construction injury and the divorce, about finding myself stranded at the bus station with nowhere else to go. She listened without judgment, the way healthcare workers do when they've heard enough human stories to understand that life rarely follows a straight path. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to exactly where we need to be, she said when I finished. I became a nurse because my father died in a car accident when I was 16. Spent so much time in hospital waiting rooms that I eventually realized I wanted to be on the other side of that equation, helping families instead of being the one getting bad news. Do you think that's what this is? The taxi job, I mean. Something I need to be doing. Hard to say, but if you're driving people like Betty and Earl to where they need to go, that sounds pretty important to me. The lights of North Little Rock began to appear ahead, a modest sprawl of residential neighborhoods and strip malls spreading out from the Arkansas River. Michelle directed me to her apartment complex, a cluster of 2-story buildings with names like Oakwood Village and Riverbend Estates. As I pulled into the parking lot, she handed me a $20 bill and a small piece of paper. What's this? My phone number. If you ever need someone to talk to about the things you see driving nights, give me a call. Trust me, healthcare workers understand weird better than most people. She got out of the car and walked toward her building, scrubs wrinkled from a long shift, but her step still steady. I watched until she disappeared inside, then looked at the piece of paper. Below her phone number, she'd written, "Some passengers are exactly who they appear to be. Those are often the most important ones." The drive back to Pine Bluff felt different than the trip out. The GPS guided me along Highway 165 south without any detours through memorial roads, and the radio played normal classic rock instead of phantom gospel music. For 30 minutes, I almost convinced myself that driving for Moonlight Cab Company might be just like any other taxi job. Then I saw her. A woman stood beside the road about 5 miles north of Pine Bluff. Her thumb extended in the universal gesture of hitchhiking. She wore a bright yellow dress that seemed to glow in my headlights, and her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. Even from a distance, something about her posture looked wrong. Too rigid, like she'd been standing in that exact position for a very long time. I slowed the car and felt my hand reach toward the turn signal, instinct overriding common sense. Then I remembered Protocol 6. If you see a woman in a yellow dress standing by the road with her thumb out, do not stop. She's been trying to get home since 1974. I kept driving, but as I passed her, she turned to watch my car. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of her face, beautiful but somehow empty, like a photograph that had been left in the sun too long. She didn't move from her spot, didn't drop her thumb, just continued standing there as if the next car might be the one to finally take her wherever she'd been trying to go for 50 years. My radio crackled. "Car number 3, you've got to pick up at the Shell station on Dollarway Road. Passenger name is Rebecca Mason." I keyed the mic. "Copy that. On my way." Jackson's voice came through. "How's your first night going, Waylon?" "Educational. Picked up a nurse who actually turned out to be alive." "Those are refreshing. Makes you appreciate the straightforward fares." Jackson paused. "You passed by the woman in yellow on 165? "Yeah. Followed Protocol 6. "Good, ma'am. I made the mistake of stopping for her my second week. She got in the car, gave me an address in Stuttgart, and we drove for 3 hours through countryside that don't exist on any map. When we finally got to what she claimed was her house, it was just an empty lot with a foundation covered in kudzu." "What happened then?" "She thanked me for the ride, paid me with money from the Ford administration, and vanished. Took me until sunrise to find my way back to Pine Bluff." The Shell station appeared ahead, its fluorescent canopy creating a pool of harsh white light in the darkness. A woman in her 40s stood near the entrance, holding a small suitcase and checking her watch nervously. She had the frazzled appearance of someone whose travel plans had gone sideways. "Rebecca Mason?" I asked as she approached the car. "Yes, thank goodness. My sister was supposed to pick me up from the Greyhound station, but her car broke down." Rebecca climbed into the back seat, setting her suitcase beside her. "I need to get to the airport in Little Rock. My flight to Dallas leaves at 6 a.m. "That's cutting it pretty close. It's already past midnight." "I know, but I can't miss this flight. My daughter's getting married tomorrow afternoon, and I'm supposed to help with the final preparations." Rebecca's voice carried the stress of someone whose carefully planned schedule had collapsed. "How long will it take to get there?" "About an hour and a half if traffic's light." "That should work. I can check in online during the drive." As we pulled back onto Highway 165, Rebecca busied herself with her phone, trying to navigate airlong websites while I concentrated on following the GPS directions. For once, the route seemed straightforward, straight down to Little Rock, then east to the airport. "GPS shows we're making good time," I said, trying to ease her anxiety. "Thank you. This whole trip has been a disaster from start to finish. Flight delays, missed connections, and now this taxi situation." Rebecca looked up from her phone. "But at least you showed up when you said you would. That's more than I can say for most of the travel industry lately. We were approaching Pine Bluff when the GPS announced, "In 500 feet, turn right onto Ohio Street." I felt my stomach tighten. Ohio Street led toward the intersection mentioned in Protocol 4, 6th and Ohio, where I was forbidden from picking up passengers between 2:17 a.m. and 2:23 a.m. I checked the dashboard clock, 12:47 a.m. Still safe, but getting closer to the danger zone. "Is everything all right?" Rebecca asked, noticing my tension. "Just checking the route. Sometimes the GPS takes odd detours through downtown." We turned onto Ohio Street, passing through a neighborhood of small houses and corner stores that had seen better decades. Most windows were dark, but occasionally I glimpsed the blue flicker of late-night television or the warm glow of porch lights left on for family members working graveyard shifts. "Turn left on 6th Street," the GPS instructed. There it was, the intersection from Protocol 4. I glanced at the clock again, 12:52 a.m. We'd be through this area long before the prohibited time window, but something about the intersection made me nervous anyway. It looked ordinary enough, just two residential streets meeting under a single streetlight. But there was some quality to the emptiness that felt expectant, like a stage waiting for actors to appear. We passed through without incident and continued toward the commercial section of Pine Bluff. Rebecca had successfully checked in for her flight and was now texting rapidly, presumably updating her daughter about her travel progress. "Can I ask you something?" she said, looking up from her phone. "Sure. Have you been driving taxi long? You seem a little cautious." "First night on the job. Still getting used to the routes." "That explains it. I was wondering why you kept checking the clock and looking so serious." Rebecca settled back in her seat. "My ex-husband was the same way when he started his job at the power company. Spent weeks memorizing safety protocols and emergency procedures. Smart policy. Better to be over-prepared than sorry." "True, but he took it to extremes. Started seeing electrical hazards everywhere, even at home. Wouldn't let our daughter use her hairdryer because he was convinced it would short-circuit and burn the house down." We were approaching the edge of Pine Bluff now, heading toward the open highway that would take us to Little Rock. The GPS showed a clear route with no mysterious detours or memorial highways. "Did he ever relax about the job?" I asked. "Eventually. Once he realized that following the safety rules was enough, he didn't need to create additional fears." Rebecca paused. "Sometimes when we're in new situations, we imagine dangers that aren't really there." Her words hit closer to home than she probably intended. Was I overreacting to the supernatural elements of this job? Creating additional anxiety about protocols that might be nothing more than elaborate pranks or local superstitions? Then I remembered Betty walking through Ian's cemetery gates, and Earl apologizing to the ghosts of the Miller family, and the 4th floor that appeared and disappeared from the Simmons Bank building. No, the dangers were real. The protocols existed for good reasons. We merged onto Interstate 40 West toward Little Rock, and Rebecca returned to her phone calls. I could hear her talking to her daughter about flower arrangements and catering details, the normal concerns of a mother trying to help plan a wedding from a distance. About 20 minutes into the drive, my radio started crackling with static. Through the interference, I caught fragments of what sounded like a hymn. Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. Rebecca looked up from her phone. "Is that gospel music?" "Company radio sometimes picks up local stations," I said, remembering Protocol 5. "Let it play until the song finishes." The music continued for about 3 minutes, the volume fluctuating like someone was adjusting a radio dial somewhere far away. Rebecca hummed along softly. Apparently, she knew the words. My grandmother used to sing that during Sunday dinner preparations, she said when the song faded back to static. She had a beautiful voice. Used to say that hymns were prayers you could carry with you. Sounds like a wise woman. She lived to be 97, and never lost her faith that everything happens for a reason. Rebecca's expression grew thoughtful. I used to think that was naive, especially after my divorce. But lately I'm starting to wonder if she was right. What changed your mind? Little things. Like tonight, my sister's car breaking down should have been a disaster, but your cab company was able to send someone immediately. Most taxi services in small towns shut down by 10 p.m. Actually, most taxi services in small towns didn't have supernatural GPS systems or dead passengers with unfinished business, but I kept that observation to myself. We passed a sign reading Little Rock, 45 miles, as the highway stretched ahead through rolling Arkansas countryside. Rebecca had moved on to coordinating with the wedding photographer, her voice carrying the particular stress of someone trying to manage family logistics across multiple time zones. The photographer wants to start at 8 a.m. for getting ready shots, she was saying. Can you have the flowers delivered to the hotel by 7:30? Good, good. And the cake, is that still scheduled for noon delivery? I found myself thinking about Earl and his decades of guilt over the Miller family fire. How many people carry that kind of burden? How many spend years wishing they could apologize for mistakes, make amends for failures, say goodbye to people they lost? Maybe the night roads served a purpose beyond just transportation. Maybe they provided something that daylight couldn't offer, a bridge between the world of the living and the place where regrets go to die. Driver, I just realized I never asked your name, Rebecca said, ending her call. Waylon Briggs. Well, Waylon, I want you to know that you're probably saving my daughter's wedding. If I'd missed that flight. She shook her head. Some things you just can't fix once they're broken. Sounds like you raised a daughter who understands that family comes first. I tried. After her father and I divorced, I worried that she'd grow up thinking relationships don't last, that commitment doesn't mean anything. But she found a good man, someone who treats her the way she deserves. The lights of Little Rock began to appear on the horizon, a modest skyline compared to Memphis, but still the biggest city in Arkansas. As we approached the metropolitan area, I felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that we'd made it without any supernatural encounters, disappointment that this straightforward trip was almost over. The airport exit should be coming up soon, Rebecca said, checking her phone for the terminal information. Adams Field, Terminal D, I confirmed, reading the GPS display. As we took the airport exit, Rebecca gathered her purse and checked her boarding pass one final time. What's the damage for the fare? $78. She handed me a $100 bill. Keep the change. And thank you again for getting me here safely. I pulled up to the departure terminal and helped her with her suitcase. As she walked toward the entrance, she turned back and waved. Take care of yourself out there, Waylon. Drive safe. Watching her disappear into the terminal, I realized she'd been exactly what she appeared to be, a living passenger with normal problems and ordinary destinations. According to Michelle's note, those were often the most important fares. As I programmed the GPS for the return trip to Pong Bluff, the display showed route calculated. Estimated arrival 2:15 a.m. Caution. Time-sensitive protocols in effect. 2:15 a.m. Right in the middle of the prohibited time window for 6th and Ohio Street. The return drive to Pine Bluff started peacefully enough. I-40 East was mostly empty, except for long-haul truckers, and the occasional night shift worker heading home. The GPS showed a straightforward route back to town, but I couldn't shake the anxiety about that time warning, caution, time-sensitive protocols in effect. I knew exactly what that meant. Protocol 4. The intersection of 6th and Ohio between 2:17 a.m. and 2:23 a.m. As I passed the Pine Bluff 20 miles sign, I checked the dashboard clock, 1:58 a.m. Even if I hit every green light, I'd reach that intersection right in the middle of the forbidden window. The GPS seemed to be routing me directly through downtown rather than around it, despite my mental pleas for an alternate path. My radio crackled. "Car number 3, what's your status?" "Returning from Little Rock Airport drop-off. ETA about 20 minutes. Jackson's voice came through with unusual urgency. "Waylon, what time do you show on your clock?" "Just past 2 a.m. Listen to me carefully. When you get to 6th and Ohio, do not stop for anything. I don't care if someone's lying in the street bleeding. You drive through and you don't look back. You understand?" "Copy that. What exactly happens there?" "Nothing you want to find out firsthand. If you see someone flagging you down, pretend they're invisible. If you hear knocking on your windows, ignore it. If your radio starts talking to you in voices that aren't mine or dispatch, turn it off." The transmission ended with a burst of static, leaving me alone with my growing dread and the rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt. I took the Pine Bluff exit at 2:11 a.m. The streets were completely deserted. No late-night diners, no gas stations with overnight clerks, no police cruisers making rounds. Just empty roads lined with sleeping houses and the occasional streetlight creating pools of yellow illumination. The GPS guided me through residential neighborhoods, where every porch light seemed dimmed and every window was dark. Spanish moss hung from oak trees like funeral shrouds, and the smell of the Arkansas River drifted through my partially open window. Muddy water and decaying vegetation. "In 800 feet, turn right onto Ohio Street," the GPS announced. My hands started sweating against the steering wheel. 2:14 a.m., 3 minutes until the danger zone. Ohio Street stretched ahead like a tunnel through the darkness. The houses here were older, dating back to the 1940s and 50s, with small front yards protected by chain-link fences and driveways cracked by decades of Arkansas heat. Most looked well-maintained despite their age, but something about the street felt wrong. Too quiet, too still, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. 2:15 a.m. I reduced my speed slightly, hoping to delay reaching the intersection, but the GPS immediately recalculated. Continue straight. Destination ahead. A dog started barking somewhere in the distance, then abruptly stopped mid-bark. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, oppressive in a way that made my skin crawl. 2:16 a.m. In 200 feet, continue straight past 6th Street, the GPS instructed. There it was. The intersection appeared in my headlights like a stage set, waiting for a performance to begin. The street light at the corner flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows that made the empty crosswalk look like it was moving. 2:17 a.m. As I approached the intersection, I saw a figure standing on the corner. A man in his 30s wearing a Pine Bluff High School Letterman jacket and jeans. He raised his hand and waved frantically, and stepped into the street directly in front of my car. Every instinct screamed at me to slam on the brakes. The man was close enough that I could see his face clearly. Panicked, desperate, mouth moving as if he were shouting something I couldn't hear through the closed windows. But Jackson's warning echoed in my head. Do not stop for anything. I kept driving. The man, or whatever he was, didn't move out of the way. Instead, my taxi passed through him like he was made of fog. In my rearview mirror, I saw him turn and begin running after the car, his Letterman jacket flapping behind him like broken wings. But he wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the shadows at the intersection. A woman in a nurse's uniform from what looked like the 1960s. A child in a school dress carrying a lunchbox. An elderly man leaning on a cane. All of them began moving toward my car with the same desperate urgency, waving their arms and calling out silently. 2:18 a.m. My radio erupted with voices, not Jackson's familiar drawl, but a cacophony of overlapping conversations. Please, I just need to get home. My wife doesn't know where I am. The accident wasn't my fault. I left my children at school. Please stop. Please help me. I reached for the radio to turn it off. But before I could touch the dial, the voices shifted into something else. Screaming. The sound of metal tearing, glass breaking, impact after impact echoing through the small speaker. Then silence. 2:19 a.m. I was past the intersection now, but my rearview mirror showed something that made my stomach lurch. The figures hadn't given up. They were following me, not running but somehow keeping pace with the car, despite my steady 35 miles per hour. The man in the Letterman jacket was closest, his face pressed against the rear window, mouth open in a soundless plea. More were joining them. They emerged from side streets and front yards, a growing procession of people in clothing from different decades, all reaching toward my taxi with the same desperate need. 2:20 a.m. The temperature inside the car began dropping. My breath started coming out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the inside of the windows. The steering wheel felt like ice beneath my palms. Through the accumulating frost, I could see the figures multiplying. Dozens now, then more. They surrounded the car like a funeral procession, some walking, others seeming to float inches above the pavement. A few reached out to touch the windows, leaving handprints that glowed briefly before fading. My radio crackled back to life. Why won't you help us? We just want to go home. The voice was different now, younger, clearer. I recognized it somehow, though I couldn't place from where. We've been waiting so long, so very long. 2:21 a.m. The GPS screen began flickering, showing routes that couldn't exist. Roads leading underwater, highways that curved impossibly upward into the sky. Destinations with names like Where the Lost Things Go and The Place Before Sleep. But I kept driving straight, following Ohio Street away from 6th. Away from whatever force gathered the desperate dead at that intersection every night between 2:17 and 2:23. You could help us, the radio whispered. Just stop the car. Just turn around. We've been walking for so long. My foot pressed down on the accelerator instead. The speedometer climbed to 45, then 50 miles per hour through the residential neighborhood. Speed limits didn't matter anymore. I just needed distance from that intersection. 2:22 a.m. The figures began falling behind, their forms growing fainter with each block. The man in the Letterman jacket was the last to give up, his desperate face pressing against the rear window one final time before dissolving into mist. The temperature inside the car began returning to normal. The frost on the windows melted, leaving streaks of water that looked like tears. My radio crackled one last time. Until tomorrow night, then. We'll be waiting. 2:23 a.m. The voices stopped. The radio returned to normal static. My rearview mirror showed only empty road behind me, lit by streetlights that no longer flickered. I pulled over at a 24-hour gas station on Dollarway Road and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, hands shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. The dashboard clock showed 2:31 a.m., well past the danger zone, but I could still feel the cold that had invaded the car. My radio crackled with Jackson's familiar voice. "Car number 3, you still with us?" I keyed the mic with unsteady fingers. "Yeah, I'm here." "You made it through?" "Barely. What the hell was that?" "That's where Highway 65 used to run through town before they built the bypass in 1967. The intersection of 6th and Ohio was notorious for accidents. Dozens of people died there over the years. Head-on collisions, cars running the stop sign, drunk drivers, mechanical failures. I watched normal late-night traffic pass by on Dollarway Road. A delivery truck, a couple of cars with workers heading to early morning shifts. The ordinary world continuing as if nothing had happened. After they rerouted the highway, Jackson continued, the accident stopped. But the people who died there, they never got the memo. Every night between 2:17 and 2:23, they show up looking for rides home, rides they never got to finish. Why those specific times? That's when the last fatal accident happened. February 17th, 1967, at 2:23 a.m. Teenager named Danny Morrison was driving his girlfriend home from a school dance when a drunk driver ran the stop sign. Danny Morrison, the young man in the Letterman jacket. They've been trying to get home for 57 years, Jackson said quietly, and they'll keep trying until someone's foolish enough to stop. I started the engine and pulled back onto Dollarway Road, heading toward the depot. The rest of Pine Bluff looked peaceful in the early morning darkness, giving no hint of the supernatural drama that played out nightly at 6th and Ohio. "Jackson? Yeah? How many more intersections like that are there?" His laugh was humorless. "Son, you've got 5 more hours until sunrise. Let's just worry about getting through tonight first." I sat in the Moonlight Cab depot parking lot for 20 minutes, drinking coffee from a thermos and trying to calm my nerves. The encounter at 6th and Ohio had left me shaken in ways I hadn't expected. Seeing ghosts was one thing. Betty and Earl had been sad, but harmless. But the desperate crowd of accident victims, the way they'd surrounded my car like drowning people reaching for a life preserver, that was something else entirely. Jackson pulled up in car number 2 around 3:15 a.m., parking beside me. He rolled down his window and lit a cigarette. "First time through the intersection, hopefully the last time. You'll get used to it. Route planning gets easier once you know which streets to avoid during certain hours." Jackson took a long drag. "The key is remembering that most of them aren't malicious. They're just lost." Danny Morrison seemed pretty desperate. "Wouldn't you be? Imagine trying to get home for 57 years, watching hundreds of cars pass by, knowing that one ride could end your torment." Jackson flicked ash onto the gravel. "The really dangerous ones are the passengers who get in your car willingly. Those have agendas." My radio crackled. "Car number 3, pick up at the Riverfront Motel on Highway 65. Passenger name is Vincent Shaw." I started the engine. "Any advice for the rest of the night?" "Follow the protocols, trust your instincts, and remember, not every passenger is who they claim to be." Jackson stubbed out his cigarette. "But some of them need your help more than you'll ever know." The Riverfront Motel was a relic from the 1960s, the kind of place where traveling salesmen used to stay when Highway 65 was the main route through Arkansas. Now it catered to construction workers and people down on their luck, with weekly rates and rooms that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. A man in his 50s stood outside room 12, wearing a wrinkled business suit and carrying a leather briefcase that had seen better decades. His gray hair was combed carefully despite the late hour, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept in days. "Vincent Shaw?" I asked as he approached the car. "Yes, thank you for coming so quickly. His accent carried traces of education and refinement that seemed out of place at the riverfront motel. "I need to get to Oakwood Cemetery." My stomach tightened. "Protocol 2. "It's after midnight, sir. The fare to the cemetery is triple rate." "I understand. Money isn't a concern." Vincent climbed into the back seat, setting his briefcase carefully beside him. "I've been waiting 43 years for this opportunity. A few extra dollars won't matter now." As we pulled out of the motel parking lot, I studied Vincent in the rearview mirror. Unlike Betty and Earl, he seemed solid, corporeal. But there was something about his eyes, a distance that suggested he was seeing things beyond the present moment. "Are you visiting someone at the cemetery?" I asked. "My wife, Margaret. She's buried in Section C near the old oak tree." Vincent's reflection gazed out the window at the passing darkness. I should have been buried beside her decades ago, but circumstances complicated things. The GPS guided us through Pine Bluff's sleeping neighborhoods, past houses where porch lights created small islands of warmth in the night. Vincent remained quiet during most of the drive, occasionally checking his watch as if he had an appointment to keep. "Can I ask what kind of circumstances?" I said as we turned onto the road leading to Oakwood Cemetery. "I was a coward." Vincent's answer was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. "When Margaret got sick, cancer, I couldn't handle watching her deteriorate. I told myself I was protecting our daughter from seeing her mother suffer, but really I was protecting myself from facing the inevitable." The cemetery gates appeared ahead, the same iron bars where Betty had vanished hours earlier. I pulled up to the entrance and turned off the engine. Margaret died while I was on a business trip to Dallas, a business trip that wasn't necessary, that I'd scheduled specifically to avoid being there when the end came. Vincent opened his briefcase and pulled out an envelope yellowed with age. I never got to say goodbye, never got to apologize for abandoning her when she needed me most. "Is that why you're here now?" "I died 3 days ago. Heart attack in a hotel room in Shreveport. But instead of moving on to wherever people like me go, I found myself back here, given one chance to do what I should have done 43 years ago." Vincent handed me 3 $20 bills, the triple rate for cemetery visits after midnight. The money felt warm and real, nothing like the vintage currency Betty and Earl had used. "Will you wait for me?" he asked. "I don't think this will take long." "How long do you need?" "However long it takes to tell my wife I'm sorry." I watched Vincent walk through the cemetery gates, his briefcase in one hand and a yellowed envelope in the other. Unlike Betty, he had to open the gate manually, proving he was still tied to the physical world in ways the other ghost passengers weren't. The cemetery stretched into darkness beyond my headlights, filled with monuments and headstones dating back over a century. Mature oak trees created shadowy canopies where Spanish moss swayed in the night breeze. Vincent's figure became smaller as he walked deeper into the grounds, following paths he obviously knew by heart. About 10 minutes later, my radio started crackling with static. Instead of gospel music or phantom voices, I heard what sounded like a conversation between two people, distant and fragmented. Waited so long to hear those words. "Forgive me, Margaret. I was such a fool. Never needed forgiveness, only understanding." Can you ever love someone who failed you so completely? Love doesn't end with death, Vincent. The voices faded back to static, leaving me alone with the night sounds of rural Arkansas. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the river bottoms, lonely and mournful. 20 minutes passed before Vincent emerged from the cemetery. He walked slowly, but his posture seemed different, straighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The briefcase and envelope were gone. "Thank you for waiting," he said as he got back into the car. "How did it go?" "Better than I had any right to hope." Vincent settled into the back seat with a deep sigh. She was there, waiting at her grave. Still beautiful. Still the woman I fell in love with 50 years ago. "What did you tell her?" "Everything I should have said when she was dying. That I was sorry for running away. Sorry for letting fear make me selfish. Sorry for missing the most important moment of our life together." Vincent's reflection smiled for the first time since I'd picked him up. And she told me something I needed to hear. What was that? That she never doubted my love, even when I doubted it myself. That she understood why I couldn't stay, because she knew me better than I knew myself. As we drove back toward town, Vincent seemed to be growing fainter, as if he was slowly dissolving into the darkness. By the time we reached the commercial district of Pine Bluff, I could barely see his reflection in the rearview mirror. "Where would you like me to drop you off?" I asked. "Anywhere is fine. I won't be needing earthly transportation much longer." Vincent's voice was becoming softer, more distant. "Thank you for bringing me to her. Some journeys can only be completed by taxi." I pulled over at a bus stop on Main Street. When I turned around to say goodbye, the back seat was empty. Only the 3 $20 bills remained, proof that Vincent Shaw had been more than a dream. My radio crackled. "Car number 3, you've got to pick up at the Waffle House on Camden Road. Passenger name is Thomas Cross." I recognized the location, the same Waffle House where I'd picked up Betty on my first run. As I drove through the empty streets, I found myself thinking about the passengers I'd carried tonight. Betty returning to her grave, Earl apologizing to the Miller family, Vincent reconciling with his wife, all of them using the night roads to complete unfinished business. The Waffle House glowed against the darkness like a beacon for insomniacs and shift workers. But when I pulled into the parking lot, no one was waiting outside. I checked the time. 4:23 a.m. Maybe the passenger had given up and gone inside. I walked through the front door, setting off a small bell. The interior was classic Waffle House, yellow booths, checkered floor, the smell of coffee and bacon grease that had soaked into every surface over decades. A waitress in her 60s looked up from refilling sugar dispensers. "You the taxi driver?" she asked. "Looking for Thomas Cross." "Ain't no Thomas Cross here, honey. Haven't seen a customer in over an hour." The waitress gestured toward the empty restaurant. "You sure you got the right place?" I checked my radio log, but the pickup request was clearly documented. "Did anyone leave a message about needing a cab?" "Nope. Been quiet as a tomb in here all night." As I turned to leave, the waitress called after me. "You know, there was a Thomas Cross who used to come in here regular-like, but that was years ago. Nice fellow, always ordered the same thing, coffee black and a waffle with extra syrup." What happened to him? Died in a car wreck out on Highway 65. Must have been, 15 years ago now. Real tragedy. He was coming back from visiting his granddaughter in Little Rock when a drunk driver crossed the center line. My radio crackled as I walked back to the car. Car number 3, passenger requesting pickup at the following address. The dispatcher's voice became garbled, replaced by static and what sounded like backward speech. I keyed the mic. "Dispatch. I didn't copy that address. Can you repeat?" The radio went silent for several seconds, then, "Car number 3, please respond to Tiert's Noise Revid 821. Tiert's Noise Revid 821. I grabbed the laminated protocols from my visor and found what I was looking for. Protocol 7. If If a passenger gives you an address that your GPS can't locate, ask them to spell the street name. If they spell it backwards, end your shift immediately and return to the depot. But this wasn't a passenger. It was dispatch. Or something pretending to be dispatch. I programmed my GPS for the depot and started driving, ignoring the increasingly frequent radio calls requesting pickup at addresses that didn't exist, spoken in voices that grew less human with each transmission. The first hints of dawn were creeping across the Arkansas sky when I pulled into the Moonlight Cab depot. The radio had finally gone quiet after 20 minutes of increasingly frantic calls from whatever was pretending to be dispatch, offering rides to passengers with names like Sarah Draw Cab and destinations that existed only in mirror writing. Lester's office light was on, and I could see him through the window, sitting behind his desk with a cup of coffee and what looked like financial records spread across the surface. Jackson was already there, leaning against car number 2 and smoking his post-shift cigarette. "How'd it go?" Jackson asked as I climbed out of the Crown Victoria. "Educational. Picked up a dead county clerk, a ghost fire chief, a living nurse, a normal passenger going to catch a flight, and a businessman who needed to apologize to his wife's grave." I handed him the keys. Plus, I drove through a crowd of accident victims and got fake pickup calls from something that definitely wasn't human. "Sounds like a typical Tuesday night." Jackson stubbed out his cigarette. "You coming back tomorrow?" I looked at car number 3, with its 280,000 miles in interior that smelled like decades of human stories. 8 hours ago, I'd been a broke construction worker sleeping in a bus station. Now I was... what? A chauffeur for the dead? A bridge between the world of the living and whatever lay beyond? "Yeah," I said. "I'll be back." Jackson smiled. "Good. This job gets easier once you stop fighting it and start accepting that Pine Bluff has more residents than the census counts." Lester emerged from his office carrying a manila envelope and looking like he'd been up all night balancing books that refused to add up properly. "Waylon, how was your first shift?" "Profitable." I handed him the night's fares, over $200 in bills ranging from the 1960s to present day, and enlightening. "Any problems with the protocols?" "Followed them to the letter, though something was trying to send me fake pickup calls toward the end of the night." Lester nodded, as if this was perfectly normal. "That happens sometimes, especially to new drivers. The night roads attract attention from things that don't like our services. But as long as you stick to the rules, they can't touch you." He handed me the manila envelope. "Your first week's pay, plus a bonus for making it through the night without any major incidents. Most new drivers quit after their first encounter with the woman in yellow or the 6th Street intersection." The envelope felt heavier than I'd expected. Inside were crisp new bills, more money than I'd seen since my construction settlement. "One more thing," Lester said. "Betty Henderson left something for you." He pulled a small piece of paper from his shirt pocket. Written in careful cursive were the words, "Thank you for the ride home. Some journeys matter more than destinations. B.H." I folded the note and put it in my wallet, next to Michelle Torres's phone number. As I walked back to my room at the Riverfront Motel, the sunrise painted the Arkansas River gold and pink. Normal people were starting their normal days, commuting to regular jobs, dropping kids at school, visiting grocery stores where the only spirits were in the liquor aisle. But I'd found my place in the other world, the one that operated after dark when the boundaries between life and death became negotiable. The night roads of Pine Bluff were full of people who needed rides to destinations that didn't appear on any map except the GPS in a Moonlight Cab. I set my alarm for 4 p.m. and closed the blackout curtains. Tomorrow evening, I'd return to car number 3 and follow whatever route the GPS programmed, carrying passengers, both living and dead, to places they needed to reach. Some folks might call it a strange way to make a living. But after losing everything in Memphis and washing up in Arkansas with nothing but bus fare and broken dreams, I'd learned that strange didn't necessarily mean wrong. Besides, everybody needs to get home eventually, even the dead.